class.
Thanks, Felicia. Yeah, that's thank you for reminding me to tell everyone there's the week of jewelry making coming up. We're doing 2 classes for you guys, and they will pop up on the site soon. I've submitted them and I'm excited to share them with you, but they're a surprise, so you get to see them when they pop up, hopefully soon. And so today we're doing crystal hoops on macrame design, and this is the fun kind of like fusion of using memory wire and using some really cool knotting cord and bright colors, and then of course crystal, because crystal, right? So today's class is one of my favorites. I'm going to take you through how to make one of these, and they actually are pretty fast to work up and they're really forgiving. I'm going to show a bunch of examples of variation that happens at the time that you're making these, that is, and how to make that work for you, how it's okay. So because memory wire for me is kind of challenging, so it's a little tricky. But so what I have here on the mat is a good example, and I'm going to show you the earrings that I have on up close, which are the originals. So what I did is I went ahead and preserved the memory wire shape that comes in the packaging. So whenever you purchase memory wire, you're going to get something that looks like this. And this is the one they have at Michael's large bracelet. You could find it as small and make a smaller hoop. That's totally great. You'll just want to adjust your counts. But the thing about macrame is it is so forgiving when it comes to how you can scrunch it. You can squish it up, or you can space it out, and you can do that to make it fill your hoop with the count that you have on there. And so that happened to me a few times with some of my samples here, and I'll walk you guys through them as we get there, but just know that this is a really forgiving technique that you can make work, even if you have like a slightly different size hoop that you cut, or maybe the overlap was a little off by a millimeter. This is going to be doable no matter what, right? And other shapes, other frames, if you can get beads on it and you want to do your knots on those, that's going to work great. You can use any color of, I'm using a Czech crystal bicone. Any color of these is great. That's what I've done in all my samples. They're all crystals. I think I've got pink here and the bright yellow here. And I did kind of a mix of AB finishes and regular finishes. But that said, really any beads are going to work. If you can get them on the memory wire, then it's a win. It's going to work. And let's see, other stuff you're going to need. You're going to need some tools, because memory wire is so strong. You don't want to use your regular flush cutters on these. So most flush cutters are meant to cut copper wire with a plating, or just copper wire, right? And they even say it inside. Most of them will say copper wire. You don't want to be using those for this. You'll need to get some memory wire cutters. So these are cutters that are designed to cut this material. And they also do really well on our stainless steel head pins. So you'll notice those are a little tough to cut with a regular flush cutter too. So definitely need that. That's a must with the memory wire. And then I'm going to be using some bail forming pliers. And here's where you could get away with changing it up. You could use different stuff. I'm going to be using the second largest, which is the 3 millimeter diameter of the bail making plier. And round nose pliers will also work if you want those hoops. It's going to form this little circle here. If you want those circles to be exactly the same, then all you really got to do is just mark a Sharpie on your round nose plier so you get the same loop size. So there's that. And then at the end, I'm going to be needing to pull on some ear wires and jump rings. And then of course the cord, the knotting cord. So you guys have probably seen this. If you've been in store, if you're like me, you couldn't walk past this. I couldn't. The first time I saw them, the colors, I didn't even know what I was going to do with them when I bought them, but I couldn't walk past them. So, and it gives you so much opportunity to make a bunch of different colors, right? So I've already made one in this color and in the yellow, and I've done this one. This one's probably the easiest to see, so we'll probably go with that today, but I'm really looking forward to making a few more. Like I'd love to use the salmon orange and this purple. There's a brown for earth tones, there's a gray. So have fun. It's going to be really fun to make those. And then let's see, anything I'm forgetting? Chain nose pliers at the end, just to put on to maneuver the jump ring. And then I'm going to be using a cord burner. And so this basically takes the end of your cord and it kind of mushrooms it a little bit and melts it. and you can press on it and use it as a substitute for glue. If you don't have one of these or you don't like to use them, you can just glue it with some fabric glue when you get to the end, trim it and glue it. There's also, I've seen a lot of people use a regular lighter, like a butane lighter. They often what they do is they just kind of hover it a little bit further away. And then they take and they turn off the flame and they touch the hot part of the metal to the cord. And then they'll take their finger and just pat it. So that's another way you could do it. I did try something with a candle just to see if I could recommend that. And I found that I was not successful at getting that to work. That doesn't mean someone else couldn't try it. It's just that if I couldn't do it, I can't recommend it, but there's lots of different ways you can melt this cord. It's completely fusible if you can heat it up a little bit. Okay, let's see. So let's start with making our hoop first. I need to give a shout out to my friend Carol from Carol Carmen Jewelry, because she's the one that gave me the bravery to try making things with like this kind of hoop with memory wire. And she originally did a design where she put daggers on it. And I thought that was so cool. So I am borrowing from that and creating this hoop for us that we can use to make our macrame frame. What you'll want to do is take your memory wire out of the packaging, find the end of it, and try to, if it's kind of coiled on itself, just find the end that's free. So here's mine. All right, let's get this all out of the way. So what you want to do is make sure it overlaps by about an inch. And like I was saying at the beginning, this doesn't need to be perfect or exact. It's just giving you a ballpark, because I know a lot of you guys are, if you're like me, you like to measure and at least try to start from something that's repeatable. And so if you want to do that, just take the end and measure about an inch, and just know that you want to cut at the point where they overlap about an inch. So I'm going to grab these memory wire shears and just cut it at about that point. So there's my hoop, and it's overlapping by about an inch. And so we're going to post those aside. I'm going to get these bail forming pliers out. And again, I'm using the 3mm second largest. This doesn't need to be exact either. It can be any size hoop you want. And then I'm going to take one end of those and roll it away from myself. The thing about memory wire that I think one of the reasons I struggled with it for so long is I would try to bend it inward on its curve instead of outward on its curve. If you bend outward on its curve, you're going to have better luck. I'm not totally sure why, but it kind of works out that way. And I just kind of wish I'd seen that episode from Meredith first before I wasted a bunch of memory wire. But so I'm going to bend it away from its curve point, right? It's curving in this direction. I'm going the opposite direction of its curve. And I'm going to do that until I reach the point where I'm touching the memory wire. And then I'll just go ahead and a lot like when we're making regular simple loop, and move my pliers back a little bit to give me some space, and then just move it forward again. And then just go ahead and let that loop cross itself a little bit. So there's one side. And you can play with it if it's got a pokey side, you can always bend it back or forward a little more. Like, for example, I've got a little pokey side there, so I might give it a little bit like that. All right, so same thing on the other side. We're just going to pick up the end, and I like to do this motion where I kind of test the flushness of it, and then just bend that forward. Again, we're going away from its natural curve. And here's my loop. I'm going to tighten that one up. There we go. So they don't have to be perfect. They're all going to be a little different. Let me show you some quick examples. So in case you're at this point where I'm at and you're not feeling like you love it. Okay, so I've got a little space here. On this one, my space is a lot closer. It's still going to work. Here's a more dire example. I got this one right, where they're pretty close. And this one, we're so far away from each other, I had to add 3 jump rings. It looks amazing. It looks cute. I mean, with the 3 jump rings, no problem. And I wear it side by side with this one, and nobody notices that at all. They also have different counts. This one, I managed to get the full count on. This one has one less. And the reason that happened is then part I'm going to explain next because I just did it. I do this repeatedly and I forget to put the crystals on before I form my second loop. That happened here. And what I didn't want to waste my materials. So I trimmed it, put my crystals on, and then form the loop. So don't be like me and forget. I do it almost every time, but the crystals need to go on before you close your second one. So we'll do it again. Grab another one here. I literally did that 3 times yesterday. Still did it again today. So it can happen. But the long story short there is it's going to work regardless. You can either salvage it and save it, or you can, like I did on that pink one, or you can just start again. And what I might do on this one is I might make another pair and try to duplicate my mistakes so I have a matching set. If I really wanted to be a perfectionist, I could do that, or I could just wear them, which is actually what I did. All right, so let's form a loop again. You got that same 1-inch overlapping loop. And I'll pick up this side, roll it forward. And then I'm going to put on 12 crystals before I make the second one. So let's use this color. Unless, well, let's see. Maybe a contrasting. Let's grab, let's do a red. I think that will look really cute. So let's do that. I'm going to get 12 crystals on there. This is going to be a unique look. Actually, I kind of wish I'd grabbed it orange one. The orange with the teal would also look cool, but let's go with the red. There's 3, 4, and 5. Here's 8, 9, and 12. And again, that count is up to you. You can do 12 if you've got the full, hoop going around. And it looks like that's what I have. 12 is going to fit fine, but like I was saying before, if it didn't work out or you had to cut a loop off and restart, you can always change that count to accommodate what you think will fit. Okay, so in case anyone wants dimensions on this right now, if you're doing 12 crystals, I've currently got a diameter going of about 2 1/4. The one where I could only fit one less, that diameter was only 2. So I don't know if this is always going to hold true as 1-for-1, but it seems like every 1/4 inch crystal maybe. I don't know if the math would check out on that or not, but here's 2 inches with one less. And we're doing 2 1/4 here. That might help you out if you're also using one of these with a different size here, because these come in other sizes. So give that a try and subtract or add based on where you're at, close to that number. And so now I'm going to finish this other end. Let's grab the pliers again. And now I'm going to roll it just like we did before. Grab that, roll forward until it meets. And this one, I'm getting a little bit of an overlap. That's okay. So on this one, I might actually just put my ear wire like that. So the variation is okay. Don't sweat it and don't let it stop you. Okay, so let's get some cord, and about 60 inches is going to work for this. 60 inches is more than you need, but you want to have a little extra it's hard to make knots with a short tail, right? So you want to have enough to work with. You could probably get away with doing 50 inches, but 60 might be better, or a wingspan. Just do a wingspan and you got it. Okay, so what we're going to do with this cord, and if anyone's new to macrame, don't sweat it. We're going to do this a bunch of times. I'm going to bring my camera lower now. So I had it up so I could get my tools under it. We're going to come down a little lower here. Get some lights coming closer. Let's I really want you guys to be able to see this part. Okay. So it's super easy. This is the same knot over and over. Take one end of your cord and you want to just kind of fold it into a loop like that. So we're just making a little rainbow shape like this. And it doesn't matter which side of your component you start on, just bring one side of it on. It's on top, right? Sorry, like that. So it's on top of our loop that we made. And you want your loop to face the outside. Oh, sorry, I'm off camera. So I laid my loop down with the rainbow kind of like facing me like that. So just like that. And then just go ahead and put your component on top of it. And what I like to do just to keep everything in place is I'll just take my fingers and hold it down on the mat for just a minute so that I don't lose the position of stuff. Take the short side and bring it up through the loop like that. And then take this other one right here, do the same thing. It's just really long, so it's going to be a little more awkward, but we're doing the same thing with it. I'm just going to get my crystals out of the way, and I'm keeping the pressure on the mat just so I can preserve what's happening here. This is just a lark's knot. I'm going to pull each side to tighten. So you should get something that looks like that. And the if anyone has any, I'm just taking a quick look at the chat just to make sure everyone's okay with lark's knot. We can pull it off and do it one more time if anyone needs to see it. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't see anyone saying that it's a no-go yet. So what I'll do is I'll keep going. And then I think we've got plenty of time at the end to do like start another one. Okay, so we've got the lark's knot on there. And we got our short end. And we've got our long end here. And one trick that I like to do to hide my tail, but also not have to just trim it right away, is just kind of bring it down and hold it against the component. So again, this is the short end. And I'm just bringing it down and putting it against the component here. And now I'm going to do what's called a series of hitch knots, which is a macrame knot that looks a little bit like a lark's knot, or in fact, it looks identical to a lark's knot, but it's performed a little differently because you're only working with one strand now. So go ahead and make another one of those loops, just like we did. I'm holding the tail here, and I'm just going to bring the cord over in front of the component like that. And then I'm going to bring it behind the component and through that loop. And it will be super long at first, so just go slow. I get all tingles. Knotting cord's pretty good, but it does have the possibility of knotting on you. So there's what you'll get first. This is the first half of our hitch knot. And it's going to look a little wonky for a second, but don't worry. The next thing you want to do is bring the loop that we made, do another loop. But this time, instead of going in front of the component like we did, form that loop and hold it behind. Like that. So every other time you're going to be bringing that loop in front of the component and then behind it, and then in front and then behind. So right now I'm finishing the second half of my knot. So my cord's behind the hoop and I'm bringing it up through that loop now. This is the other end of it. Just keep pulling. And just be careful it stays on your hoop. Mine wants to go in between here, and then just pull tight. So when you pull tight, and then again, you'll just want to keep this tail under both of those knots. So give it a pull, make sure it's tight. You can cinch these up. You can kind of put your thumbnail here and make it a little bit tighter. But basically what we're going for is that. And that's the whole thing, really. That's all we're going to do for the whole design. So let's do a few more, and then we'll do a quick check-in and see where to go from there. So we'll go over the front first. And one way that you can remember, I get confused sometimes if I have to get up and go do something else and come back. Where was I before? Take a look at the hats, count the little hats that's on here. So you got the one we started with our lark's knot. And now I've got one hat here. And that tells me my next move is to bring my cord in front of my component. If I've got a hat, we're going in front. If there's no hat and it looks wonky, we're going to start our loop from behind. So this loop is going in the front. And then you can just pinch it, bring this cord through. So it's going around the back of the component here and up through the hoop. And so there's the wonky side, right? We're seeing something wonky. So that tells me I want to make my next loop cross behind my component here. I'm just going to pinch that and then bring the cord up and over the front of the component and through the hoop. And there you go. It's really it's quite satisfying to see those pop into place like that. They're very pretty. And let's do one more. Go around the front through the component. So you see we're going, it's a little harder to see down here, but we're going over the front, around and behind, still capturing that tail as I go, and then just taking the end of that cord, bringing it up through the loop. So there's our first half of the knot there. So we want to go behind now. And then up around the front and through that loop. And there's our really pretty knots. So I've got a total of 4 knots on here. This is your design choice, like what you like. But what I did on the samples was I started with 4 and then I did 3 in between each one, in between each crystal. And then I'm about to end with 4 over here. So let's go ahead and check in. Let's see. I can go ahead and add, start the next step, which is jump it over a crystal, and then of course showing what to do with the tail. I'm getting thumbs up from Sharon. Okay, we'll just keep going, and then at the end we can always start right over at the beginning for anyone who wants to see that again. So I'm going to trim my knotting cord, and I'm going to share that I like to use flush cutters to do this, but it's not required. You can use scissors. Scissors are great. I like flush cutters because of what I'm going to do with my burner. If you're going to glue it, it doesn't matter. But if you're going to do a burner and you want it to mushroom, one thing you could do is cut with the flush side of your flush cutters. Get right up next to it, but not too super close. I'm going to show you guys this really close. Leave yourself something like that. Probably 1.5 millimeters or maybe even just 1 millimeter, but just something like that with a semi-flush cut on it. And then if you don't have fresh batteries in your burner, it's not going to work as well. You want this thing to smoke. And then I also want to share that I have 2 burners. I have one that I do for stuff like this, that the tip can get all messy on. It does self-clean once you heat it up, but I have another one that I use for just thread. So things like wildfire, right? So what I'm going to do is get this thing really close so you can see it, and then let's just burn the end. Smoking, you did it. And don't be afraid to pat it. That little step right there causes the hot molten nylon-y stuff to touch the other stuff, and it acts like a glue. And it doesn't burn you. It didn't burn me because I waited like a second. But see how the tip of this thing is getting like, that's why I have one for, it will self-clean if you just kind of just let it. And make sure you don't have your smoke detector turned up too sensitive because it will set off. Okay. And so now let's get a crystal going up here. And I'm going to jump over my crystal. So I'm going to go over. And when you first jump a crystal, just go in front of the component, just like we do, because consider that we are in the same position as we were, even if there was no crystal. We're going from a hat to our next step. So go ahead and jump in front of the component with your hoop. And then just pinch it, hold it in place. Bring it through. And up through the hoop. So same thing, we just jumped over a crystal is the only difference. Up through that hoop. Okay. And so all that's going to happen when you do that is you're just going to get the same first half of a hitch knot, but it's going to jump your crystal and it's going to look really cool. So now let's go behind, bring our loop behind it, hold that all in place, bring this through, up in front of the component and through that hoop. And there's our first one. So super, super easy. It's going to keep going around. So now we're going to go in front, loop going in front. Pull it through the center of the hoop here. And that's to get it so that it can come up behind, right? Up through this loop here. Now pull tight. Now we're going to go behind it. Pull through. Up through the loop. And if you go really fast, you just want to make sure it's easier if you flat on the mat. But sometimes I lose my loop by accident because it comes through through here. So just watch for that. If your knot doesn't work, that's probably what happened. There's our next one in front. And this is actually how I work with it. I think I definitely am always kind of holding it in position with my hands while I'm working. I don't think I usually have it on the mat, except for maybe that very first step. Okay. So,
Danielle?
Yeah.
Can I ask, when you're making the next knot, how tight are you pulling?
Oh, probably medium to tight tension, but not too tight. And I'm trying to match kind of what I did before. So you can kind of use it as a gauge to see the height of the former knot. Let's see. Let me see if I can show you what I mean really quick. But yeah, the short answer is medium to tight, but it's kind of based on what you already did before. It's more about consistency than it's more about making it match what you have. So if you have the same hand the whole time, then it's no biggie. But okay, so this one's going to go behind, over, up and through. So when I do this is the one where I'm really watching it. I'm looking and seeing how does it look compared to the others, about the same height. If I pull tighter, it will make it shorter and smaller. So I'm just trying to stay the same. And these are an outlier because keep in mind, they have a strand hidden under it. So it's going to look a little different, but these are, I'm going to try to get these to look pretty close. So at this stage, what I'm looking at is that it's about the same height. And then this one I'll bring this way and through. And there you go. So yeah, it seems like more just medium to tight, medium tight. And so this is basically the whole design. So it's the same thing repeated many, many times until you get to the last crystal. And we're doing great on time. So we can do a bunch of things. I can keep going on this one if you just want to see the flow. If anyone missed the beginning, wants to see the beginning again, I can get the part right where I put the crystals on before finishing the other side. And then I could also show finishing it. I have one here. that is coming around and it's almost done. It's at its very last spot. So that's all the options we've got, and we're only halfway through our class time, so we're doing really, really good.
Danielle, I can confirm 2 things. One, definitely people want to see you start it again.
Okay.
And how you hid the tail.
Okay.
And there are a couple people, they're ready to see you really finish it.
Really finish it. Okay, I think we can do both. Do we want to start again first?
I think you should finish it.
Finish it? Okay. Yeah. All right, let's do the finish on this one. So basically straight on till morning, you just start doing those hitch knots. You keep going, jumping over your crystals. And eventually, what'll happen is you'll get to the end and you'll have some scrunching up you'll need to do. So if you have the full complement of crystals on there and you get to the end and you don't have a lot of space, one thing you can do is just start to slide it. So you can make a lot of space just by sliding. And you could do that all the way back. And then at the end, you can poof it back out and squish it back up. So super forgiving technique right here. I just jumped that last crystal. I'm going to make my next knot. It gets easier and faster as you get to the end because that cord gets shorter, which is really nice, right? It's tricky in the beginning. And then at this stage, it's a little tricky because it wants to jump over your loop. So you just kind of pinch it so it doesn't do that. But you can definitely make it work. So let's see. All right, there's my third knot. Knot number 3. I'm going to get one more on there so that it kind of matches the first 4 I had here. So I start with 4, end with 4, and all the rest in between have 3. Just a design choice. You can do any counts you like. All right. One more. So that's all set there. I'm gonna do the same thing we did before when we were getting the tail. And now I don't have the added benefit of it being kind of covered up. That would be cool, but in order to do that, we would have to add another strand. And I thought this is pretty good. The reason I didn't burn it right away at the first lark's knot on this side is because there's just not a whole lot of other stuff next to it that you can get it to lock to. But over here, I felt stronger about it being okay. So, because I can fold it over and flatten it down on top of a lot of stuff going on here. And you've also got the added benefit of there being lots of knots before it. So it's encouragement to unravel was much higher over here than it is over here. So you can get away with just kind of doing the same thing here. I haven't had one come apart on me yet. You can also, if you want extra confidence, just glue it. But there again, that's probably a little more than I needed. It's about, gosh, it's not quite 2 millimeters, but it's getting close. So let's get the burner going. And again, I'm just going to mushroom it down. And don't be afraid to just take your fingers and flatten it while it's still hot. Just what I did there. So what do we got going on there? We've got a little fused end, fused to the others. And you can really see here how it glued itself to the back of the knot there. And that's pretty much it. So let's grab some jump rings. Now this is where you may experience a variation. I have had a couple work out where one jump ring was perfect, go straight to the ear wire. And again, on this one, I explained that I went ahead and had to cut the loop and add my crystals because I forgot. So I had a very large gap on this one. So I just did 3 jump rings on that. And that was fine too. This one looks like one's going to be great. The one we started here, the new one, I have a feeling that one is going to need just go straight to the ear wire, but let's take a look. I think this is what's going to work for this one. And so you will need, just for this part, just some chain nose pliers. I like to use a combination of of a chain nose and a bent nose just for my jump rings because it's easier for me. However you like to do jump rings, it's going to work great. So I'm going to open this up. And we'll go back through both of those hoops. So that's what's working out for this one. I put my ear wire on there. Lock it down. And there it is. And they have a really nice swing when you're wearing them. They look really cute on. If you have one that's different, let me just bring those back one more time. See this one? This one, I feel like I might go straight to the ear wire on that one because they're overlapping enough. Then on this one, of course, we have this really big gap here. So a jump ring then to that one. Definitely try all those things until you get a suspend that you like. The original samples, grab those one more time. In the case of both of these, they just have a single jump ring that goes like we just showed. So just like that. So these are the ones that I was wearing earlier. Just like that. And you can see they're not exact to each other. There's definitely a little bit of variation in how the memory wire connects to itself. And they still work. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. We're doing so great on time, so we can, let's see. Let's grab another pack of memory wire over here. Let's grab this one here. Not pack, but another slinky. And then let's just cut another section. So this is again 1 inch or so overlapping. With the side note that you can do anything really, it's still gonna work. My flush cutter is here. And I saw a question pop up earlier about what I use to cut the memory wire. Absolutely don't use your regular wire flush cutters because it will damage them. It will leave little dents in them. You want to use something that's designed to cut this kind of steel. So what I use is the memory wire shears, and all the stuff that's in this is in the handout. So let me find that really quick. In the handout here, you can find everything that I'm using, including the tools and the bail forming pliers, the memory wire shears, all that should be there. So roughly, I didn't measure this time, but I'm just eyeballing roughly 1 inch of overlap. So there's our memory wire with 1 inch of overlap. And then here's the bail forming pliers. And I'm working with the bigger one here, the second biggest section there. And I'm going to form it away from myself, going against its curve. So there's one side. And let's just quickly do the other side. Oh, no, don't do the other side. Somebody shout at me in the chat. I just have this aversion to remembering. All right.
Danielle, I literally just screamed no.
It's so easy to do. And like literally, I'm not making this up 3 times yesterday. I did it. And eventually I just didn't want to waste any more memory wire. So that's how this beautiful one was born. It's like, you know what? I'm just going to use it.
No, Danielle, your hands are very strong from so much time beading and doing projects. I did want to ask on behalf of someone on the sidebar is how are you making those circles so perfect? Any extra tips on how you're managing to make your ends look so perfect?
Yeah, let me think about that. There's a great one coming up from Cindy there in the chat for what she does. But yeah, I think what I'm doing, well, 2 things. I'm making sure to use what memory wire is really tricky because it's gonna bounce back no matter which way you're bending it. So there's a little bit of over torquing that I was doing when I got to the point where I wanted it to connect. If I'd let go when it was connecting, it would have bounced back and there'd have been a gap right there. So what I did is I kind of went further past the point where I wanted it to stay and let it bounce back. I'll show it again when we add the crystals here, and it'll be, but I'll go a lot slower. And then, yeah, as far as the hand strength, there's a little bit, I don't feel like I have really, like a great, like strength going there as much as it's just the, gosh, it's kind of like more the way you're holding your wrist and the way that you're kind of using the memory wire to do the work for you a little bit. I'm not explaining that very well. I have to show it. Let's see. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to need some more crystals here. Um, 10, 11, 20. Yeah. And so, yeah, let's just go really slow. I'm getting the crystals right on here and we'll show that. Okay. And so, well, the first thing that I think is the most helpful is, again, like bending your loop in the opposite direction of the direction that memory wire is curving off of out of the packaging. It's going this way. So I'm going to go counterclockwise, or actually in this case, clockwise, right? Yeah. Depends on how I'm holding it. But it's kind of like, okay, so first thing I'm going to make sure it's flush right here. And I've gotten low. Actually, let's raise the camera a little bit. That will help. So I'm moving my wrists in a really weird way to get under it. So here we go. So kind of like your hands are like this, right? They're sideways from each other. So I'm not really using my wrist. I'm using my whole forearm, if that makes any sense. So I'm getting my whole like upper body into it. But yeah, see, I'm bending this way with my elbow and just going forward. And see over here with my thumb, it's not just the twist of my hand with this hand, but I'm actually using this hand pushing on the memory wire too. So all hands are on deck right now, all doing something. And here's the point where the tool connects with the wire and you can't go any further. And if I let go now, I mean, not only am I going to have that little gap like that, see the gap, but I couldn't go any further. So what I usually do at that point is reposition the tool. Doesn't really matter where, and then keep doing that spin. And again, I'm just going to make sure I'm holding it with my thumb on this side, and I'm using both my thumb and the tool. And here's where I go further than I want, knowing it's going to bounce on me. So hopefully that helps. And then it looks
Danielle, that was awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Okay, well, thanks. Good. I'm so good. And I hope that it helped. I never really thought about that before, but I've got a new problem that didn't happen before where it's really like crossing itself. And I have a feeling that's going to happen to somebody. So let's troubleshoot that too. Pick the loop you like the least, and let's get those shears over here again. And I'm going to cut the one that's kind of overlapping here. I want to preserve as much of this as I can, but I do need to remove part of this loop. So I'm going to cut right over here at this part right here. So this is the last spot where it's kind of still going in its straight line before it starts to curve. So let's cut right here. And memory wire shears are not precision, meaning they cut where they want to some extent. So you got to kind of just hope for the best, honestly. And then I'm going to get the second largest setting here. And let's roll this forward again. Again, there's that thumb, making it go. That's better. Okay. That'll work pretty good. Okay, so let's get a new color of cord. Let's get, I wish there was a red. There's no red in this pack, but there's a pink. So we could bring the pink back, or maybe something even wilder, like maybe this color. It's got a reddish hue to it. And again, about 50 inches, 50, 60 inches or so is how much you need to finish those. I think I cut about 50 inches myself just now, a little under a wingspan. And I'm going to make a loop. And the loop is going to have its short side facing the top of the component, the part where we made the little loops. And then the long sides go in the other direction toward the crystals. And then just go ahead and bring it down on top of that loop. So this is coming down on top of it right there. And just go ahead and press down into the mat to hold everything in place. Bring the short side up through the loop. And then bring the long side up through the loop as well. So just holding everything down. This is the long side, and it's going to take me a minute to pull it through. But that's why I think it helps to have it on the mat. And there you go. Look at the lark's knot. After you've got the lark's knot, go ahead and tighten that up a little bit, and then just fold the short side over and hold it against the metal. I just want to hold it like that. And we'll start forming our loops. So the first one is going to go in front of our component. And then I just hold it, I'm holding everything like this, right? Just making sure it all stays while I get this long strand through. Let's bring it up behind, right? And through that loop. And tighten it down. The first time you do this, you might want to just kind of pull this in a little bit. The second one, let's pass it behind. And you also don't have to you don't have to worry about where it is right now as far as how close it is to that, because it's going to slide. So just work where you're comfortable working on the component. You know, it's hard to do right up to the next to the loop because your cord's going to catch on it. So actually kind of work down from it for the first few knots. There's our first complete hitch knot. Nice and cinched down. Let's tighten it a little bit. I only do that on the first ones, but. So looking for something that looks like that. So let's get that cord in front again, through the component. Bring it up through the loop. So that first half. Second part, we're going to go behind. So we're bringing it to sit behind. And then I just pinch it. Bring all of that cord through this center here. And up and over through this loop. I think the hardest part is just that there's so much cord in the beginning. That makes it a little bit tricky to work with. There's our second hat knot, sorry, hitch knot. It looks like a hat. Oops. I lost my loop there a little bit. Okay. And another trick I like to do is sometimes I'll see this is the end of my cord over here, but I'm too lazy to wait by the end. So I'll just kind of pinch a section like that and bring that through. So it's less to pull through. It saves you a little bit of arm muscling with it. I'll show that again. So here's my loop. Loop's coming up behind the component here. Pinch that in place. And what I'll do is I'll take this right here, somewhere about yay back, maybe less than halfway back. And then just bring that through. And then I'll just pull this all through. It's a little shorthand you can try if you like it. I'm not sure it saves tons of time, but maybe just a little. So there's 4 knots there. And I'm going to go ahead and slide it up. Let's trim this. And again, I'm using flush cutters just for precision. I'm going to get really close, like right there. And let's grab our burner. Let it heat up for a second, and then go ahead and melt that. It's really fun to do that with. I really think it's cool. So it's come up and over the front. Pinch that. against the component. So again, we just went over and in front of it, and I'm just pinching that. Then I'm going to take my cord and bring it through that loop. So what it does is it just kind of hugs the component like that. Medium to tight tension there. Make a loop. This time that loop is going to go behind. Again, I'm just pinching it and just pulling this through here. And then I'll just take the loop, put it up through it. So there's our
Danielle?
first jump. Yeah.
Before you do the next two knots, there's just a few people that are not seeing the front and the back.
Gotcha,
So
okay.
let's do the slow-mo so that I really want everyone to leave the class knowing how to make this knot.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it's very subtle front and back. So let's do it in slow-mo so that you can't possibly not see it.
Is this color good?
Color's good.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start the next one. So one thing you'll want to notice is there's a little hat. If you see the hat, you want to go in front of the component. And that's true also after your first lark's knot. You want to start in front. So I'm basically taking this one single strand and making it become a loop just by bending it down. And I'm holding it on top of the component now. So we made a loop. It's on top. And I'm just pinching it there. So it's passing over on top. Now what I'm going to do is bring this cord here through the center here and then up through this loop from the back. So this is me just moving it through so that it's now behind the component here. And if I lay it on the mat, you can kind of see that better. And then we'll take the end of that and we'll bring it up through the loop we made. And when I do this pulling, because it can get loose on me, I'll just press down for a second because there's a lot of cord going, right? And there's that first one. And how that looks from this side is it looks like an open, right? You see how it's kind of coming out of the center. And when you see that, that means go ahead and go behind it for your next loop. So this next loop I form is going to form like that. I'm going to pinch it behind. And by pinch it, I mean I'm just holding it here so that I can preserve that I've got a loop. And I'm grabbing this cord and the cord's now hanging out behind it, right? I'm going to bring it through the center so that it's in front. So now it's going like that. And let's bring it up and through the loop here. And we'll just keep going. And it'll give you that little hat shape. So we see that hat, so we know our next one is going to need to go make a loop sitting in front on top of it. And then just pinch that. And so right now the cord's it's right here. I want to bring it so that it's at the back, right? I'm just bringing it through the circle. And now it's coming up around the back and bringing it up through the loop. That just makes that little lock. And you get the open. So open means go behind it. So I just go like that. And we'll just bring this through. So you see it's behind now. And it's just every other one. You're going either in front or behind. And now we're just bringing this cord up through the loop in front of the component now. And so there's your third one. And it comes out really nice. I mean, that's like, it looks very cool, especially with this cord. I don't know for sure, but I think this cord is, it's looking like it's like a 0.8 millimeter and 100% nylon. So it's definitely visible. This is also very beautiful with micro macrame cord. It's just much tighter and tinier. But you get the same, you can do the same thing with all of them, right? But learning on a big cord like this is nice. Yeah, and so let's see.
Thank you, Danielle. That was great. Thank you.
And so I see Kimberly's asking, would it work with text 210? I think it'll work with anything. Honestly, if you can get it to knot, this will work. So any cord that you've got, Nylon, you know, like just, I mean, it'll work with silk thread. I don't usually macrame with silk because I get tangles, but there's no reason it wouldn't work, right? It definitely works. And I've seen people do macrame knots with things as small as beading thread, like, you know, your nylon beading threads, like size D. I've seen people do that, but it's tedious and it's very tiny and it takes you like forever to get a millimeter, but it's possible. There's no reason it doesn't work. Just get a big magnifying glass. And
Danielle, I think for some people who enjoy doing macrame, they're going to look at anything in their stash that might be a circle that they can knot around, right? So I can see that happening. A couple people here may not have memory wire. They might have those hoops, the regular hoops that are at Michael's. They could consider working on that. And of course, they don't have to add the crystal. If the crystal doesn't fit, they could add another bead.
Totally true. Yeah. And then I wanted to share also, if you can get the bead onto your cord, instead of having the macrame jump over your crystal could be on that spot. It might work better if it's not a bicone, because a bicone is not going to sit next to the let's see if this actually fits on there. I don't know if might be a little tight. Yeah, it's not going to work. But if you could get your cord through your bead, it could be the strung now. You could string it now and then start hitch knotting again. And what would happen is your little bead would be suspended right there on your cord. People do this all the time, and so many beautiful designs. That's how they integrate a bead. Just the only trick is it's got to fit the cord. And I find that 0.8 millimeter typically doesn't fit a standard drill. It's a little too big. You can trick it too. You can kind of make it. So you see, I wasn't able to get that in there. You can trim into a point. So make a point. Then take your burner. I'm going to work from back here. You kind of like this. Burn, making a needle. Okay. Now I've firmed that up a lot, right? Maybe we can get our crystal in there. Woohoo! Yay. So that worked. So what if we did this? You could, let's see. And again, I think a round bead would be easier because this is going to want to it's going to want to do that next to the component, but let's just, for curiosity's sake, let's see what happens. So here's our loop in front, bring it through the hoop, coming up around the back and through that loop. It kind of works, you know, I'm just making it look pretty cute. Let's finish them out really quick. Yeah, so I think you could do that. If you couldn't get if it's like a hoop that doesn't open, switch to a round crystal. We have a bunch of those in 4 millimeter. Like a bunch of really, you grab one of those, switch to something round and it will be perfect. It'll sit right there for you. And that color, oh my God, it's very pretty. Okay, let's see, any more questions for me? I know I went a little over. I apologize, guys. I got excited about that. Our classes are up for next week. Next week we're doing a crystal wrap bracelet design. Let me grab this really quick. It's a 3-way wrap with little 4 millimeter bicones and a bunch of seed bead mixes. They're all in the handout if you like them, or make your own colorway. They'll all work really great. And let's see, does the ear wire go through just the middle one or all of them? Different. So, and on there, it can go anywhere. You can do a link like this, which is a jump ring connecting those 2 loops we made to the ear wire. You can put more than one jump ring if you need to join a gap. Or in the case of this one, I'm probably just going to go straight to the ear wire because it's already connecting, right? All 3 will work. So don't destroy a hoop you made just because it's not exactly like the former one. It'll still work. Yeah, the ear wire, it'll just be whatever your center point is. So here's my center point here. And in this case, the ear wire is just going to go right on that together, both of them. And then on this one, I have a jump ring connecting the ear wire to the two hoops. Oh, thanks. Wanda says she likes next week. I'm excited about next week's project. This is another one of those designs for you guys that have been with me like for a while. You know that I love a single needle design with a flow, where something like this, most people would take a glance at it. Experienced beaders would say, yeah, she did that 2 needle. No, 2 needle for me is like my brain can only handle what one hand's doing at a time. So I kind of, it's like piano was very hard for me. It's easier for me to do a flow like that. So I'll show you how. It's basically just worked as a right angle weave with little loops of really long right angle weave in between each one. We'll have fun. We'll show that next week, and it'll give you ideas for all kinds of stuff you can do because it's very flexible and can become a choker, anklet, use all kinds of different beads, mixes, colors, all that. Let's see. Yeah, and then after that, we're going into we'll be in July. We have a little gap. And then in July, we're going to kick it off with increasing and decreasing peyote. The request we got, a little advanced bead weaving technique, but show up anyway if you're new to peyote and see this, and it'll click for you when you get the peyote under your hat. And so that becomes a lot of different things. It can become a ribbon. It can become a necklace. It can, so I'll show you all those variations. And then we have a little fun trying out delicas. So this is a delica brick stitched earring, and then we glued some stud earrings on the back. These are really trending right now, so we thought we would try something cool like that. Oh, happy birthday! July's your birthday, Cindy. And then we'll just have a stash busting day after that. So this one is really fun because I used up all the old beads from all our projects. I have a big bowl of them, and I put them all on a strand. So yeah, come with us for the next 3 classes and have this is the next 4 classes, forgive me. And we'll get August up there soon. Let me know if any of you guys see it. Sometimes you guys see it before I do, so looking forward to it. All right, so unless there's any more questions for me, I can let you guys get on with your Friday. And as always, if you make beautiful stuff, we love seeing your work. So if you hashtag Make It With Michaels when you post, and hashtag John Bead, we'd love to see it and share it. We also have a Facebook group where we share our work with everybody and cheer each other on. And that is, PDFs and projects from John Bead. The best way to find it, though, is just to go to blog.johnbead.com, and you can link to it from there and to a lot of other resources. Things like past classes are all linked there, PDFs, everything. So, all right. And I wish you guys a great rest of your weekend and happy beading. Bye.